And I'm going to steal a page from Margaret Downey, who's been advocating this idea that what we need is more stories, which I kind of already mentioned a little bit. But these are the things that pull people together and also help us connect with other communities, hearing what's happened to people. And what you'll find is that, like, when Damon Fowler tells his story about how he was booted out of his house and his parents disowned him, what you'll find is that there's a bunch of people who are saying, you know, that's not what I believe. But in reality, they're all, they believe, they use the same label from the same books, and they're providing cover, and it opens up another line of communication. But, you know, I say this as I'm in the process of writing several books. Probably don't need more books like the ones I'm going to write. We probably need more things along the lines of stories. People that humanize us. We've been vilified, I think, long enough.
Next.
I've kind of already talked to Matt about this, but I'm sure he's still going to give his whole input on it regardless. I myself, I guess, label myself as an agnostic atheist, and I've kind of caught some flack for it. You know, people are telling me, are you scared to just admit that you're one or the other, or you can't be both? What are y'all's opinion on?
Most atheists are agnostic. I am in the minority of Gnostic atheists. Most theists are Gnostic. They claim to know that there's a God, that it's their God. A minority of theists are agnostic. They believe in a God, but who's to say who that God is? Agnosticism is the question of whether men can really know anything about the supernatural, and particularly the true nature of gods. An honest admission would be we can't know the nature of those things, but if the question is turned into whether we know there's a God, which is a different matter, I think, then I fall into Gnostic atheist, because Christians have no problem, and Bob Enyart on his radio show got into this with me when he said that he has no problem saying that leprechauns do not exist simply on the basis of the fact that there's not enough evidence for them to make that determination, or to claim that they exist. Well, if that criteria works for leprechauns, then it works for deities too, and I can be Gnostic atheist in that respect.
Me too.
Thank you.
I say if you're willing to stand up in Texas and call yourself any kind of secularist, what you label yourself is up to you. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think those people just aren't understanding the particular philosophical definition of agnostic you're using, and they just think, you know, you're being a wuss or whatever. Which, as long as you're putting the A-bomb in there, that's extreme, that's a big deal, just as she said.
I didn't know what agnostic or atheist meant for the longest time. I used to call myself an agnostic pagan for Christ.
And don't underestimate how much of this is nothing but personality driven. Just some people have personalities where they have to have labels, and they have to label you. And if that's not your personality and you feel obligated to act as if it is, you might as well be down at First Baptist.
Okay, so I'm a radio DJ at the NSU campus over in Natchitoches, and well, I'm also wanting to try to bring a little reasoning in on the radio station with some atheist beliefs on there. And so I was wondering what would be some good pointers to, like, good subjects to bring up while on the radio.
Well, there's a broad series of choices there. I mean, is your motivation science? Is it secularism? Is it any of skepticism? Is it any of the anti-theism? Is it any of the atrocities that are being, made plentiful in our culture by religious influences? There's so much to choose from when you pick a motivation.
Yeah, all you gotta do is, read some news stories and do some commentary on that right there. The atrocities, like he mentioned.
Your mic went off. Nope.
It might be a battery issue. But yeah, all you gotta do. Yeah, all you got to do is, start reading some news stories, which, may be in your job description as a DJ, and comment on, ISIS or, all separation of church and state issues. All you got to do, you don't even have to say you're an atheist necessarily. Just say, hey, the law is this, and this school is doing this, or look at what this belief is doing in the world.
All right, thank you.
There's another option too, which is to have believers of anything call in to not only say what they believe, but specifically why, and then you're going to get people who disagree with them to call in. So you're going to prompt this discussion whether you have anybody who's necessarily an expert in anything or not. And the discussion alone, getting different viewpoints, may be enough to do some good.
Make sure you follow up all the questions for each individual that you talk to with how do you know yours is the right perspective.
What would change your mind? Yeah, ask all of them that.
Okay, there's a big difference between criticizing, disliking, or hating an idea versus a person. How would you define the word, I guess, intolerance? Because I know me personally, whenever I comment on anything on Facebook or anything like that, in an anti-theistic sort of way, I'm accused of being intolerant or closed-minded. And also that kind of goes back to the term militant atheism. How would you address those kinds of issues?
I'm absolutely intolerant of horrible ideas that are doing horrible things. But one of the things I left out of my talk is that, we're talking about people. And my IQ didn't go up when I left Christianity. Now, I might have gotten smarter in a colloquial sense, but the people you're talking to they're not necessarily idiots, they're not evil. And as long as you're focused on what the idea is and what they're doing, the fact that they get offended, I don't give a rat's ass. You don't have a right to not be offended, and I don't have any onus to not offend you if the ideas that you're promoting are actually harmful. Now, if I'm attacking things that aren't particularly harmful, then, okay, maybe there's a problem.
Yeah, and most of the advocates of anti-theism, atheism, whichever brand you want to use, are former believers, largely because of culture, what have you, but most of us were former believers. And so you have to bear in mind that whatever believer you may be talking to today could be the next Dillahunty of tomorrow.
Probably not, though. One of the things I caught the most heat over is I did an analogy comparing the God of the Bible to a mafia boss. Nice soul there. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to it. That kind of mentality. And they got pissed. And I'm like, what kind of weak and puny God do you believe in that he needs you to come to his defense? If your God's mad at me, I'm right here. Come at me, bro. But don't send your little followers out there to do it. But the thing is, these ideas are tied almost inextricably to their self-identity. And like I said, it's enough that we exist and won't shut up to bother them. But it's even more when we're attacking the beliefs that they cherish. And you have to recognize that. And there's this thing about reaching an audience. And there's all kinds of arguments about tone. But if you recognize that the person you're talking to, because of what you said, has drawn back to the point that nothing else you say is going to make a difference to them, then take a step back and change the subject and talk about it at a different level. If your goal is to actually change minds, when I'm in a debate, I'm not trying to change my opponent's mind. I'm feeding information to the audience. But you have to be able to, you have to get better at reading that to know when you may have gone too far. But when you've gone too far is not a matter of them merely taking offense, and it's not about even your motivations. It's when the conversation is no longer productive towards a goal. That's it.
Yeah, and just to throw something else in there, I was just checking the Twitter feed a little bit ago. And because I mentioned Islam, and I gave a criticism of Islam, I'm already, today, the Twitter feed in the last hour has labeled me an Islamophobe who has generalized 2.8 billion people. How did I do that? Well, I said, is it possible, or what are the chances that this woman's going to get an abortion with these Islamic clerics giving this mandate in this specific instance? How is that a generalization? It was a question, it was a specific. And in the other case, I said that in any religious faction, you're going to have people in it that are smarter than the religious group, or that are more compassionate than whatever religion is in charge. And yet I'm being judged as being an Islamophobe and generalizing all these people. When did that even happen? So apparently I said this word and you knew that I meant it, somebody knew that I meant it in a negative sense, or and so that's all that was. And so this is a knee-jerk backlash.
You can't win. Your very existence is an affront to a lot of extreme religious people. The very fact that you would even say anything against them, or even just not believe what they believe, can be an affront. You've got to realize when those people are talking to you, because you can't win with those people, no matter what you do, no matter if you even stopped posting.
That's right. And
Go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, and be mindful about who you respond to and whose labeling you allow to affect your mission. You've got something that you're wanting to do. Someone comes on and posts and says, well, I think you're not being tolerant. You don't even have to pay attention to that. You don't have to go into their world. You just keep doing what you're doing and not worry about what they say.
Now, try to be fair, of course, but as others have mentioned today, you can be criticized and praised for the exact same statement, both be said to be fair and unfair for the exact same comment by different people.
If you do feel like engaging, the key is to ask, what is it that I've done that you specifically have a problem with? Get to the heart of what their problem is, because sometimes they're not going to tell you, because they know as soon as they say what it is, then you're going to have more ammunition and less reason to pay attention to them. But if they have a legitimate issue, then take that to heart. The nice thing about being proved wrong is that you don't have to be wrong anymore.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you guys for coming out today, because this is my first convention. Very excited. Yay! Also, quick shout out. I love that woman. She's awesome. She's very proud of her for standing up here today. Yay! My question for you guys today is in the realm of science denialism, which seems to be very big, not just on the right, but also on the left in some cases. There are lots of different instances where this has taken place, but without starting a huge fight about this, which is not possible, GMOs for one thing, or genetic engineering at all. There are people on both sides of the issue, on both sides of the question. And I was wondering why it is that people have trended to, at least in the atheist community, have trended to not, at least from what I've seen, talk about this issue.
They don't have time because they're talking about everything else.
Well, I mean, the skepticism movement has done more on that, GMOs and vaccines, and that seems to be sort of the thing they're doing. The atheism movement has a lot in common with the skeptical movement, but it's not 100% overlap. So there are a lot of people out there who are going to go,
Now there's 100% overlap.
So there are a lot of people who, are fighting these anti-GMO beliefs, the anti-vax beliefs, but they don't show up on our radar because they will not go after religion. And they consciously don't go after religion because they think it would actually hurt the other things they're doing. So you don't hear about those people as much.
Yeah. Now, I know people who are technically atheists. They don't believe in a God. They don't actually follow any organized religion. They're not skeptics in the least, because they believe in all kinds of homeopathy and other matters of woo, right? It's just like she said, they're angry at me for criticizing religion. Why? I can't imagine, except that they want to continue to believe that they have some celestial spirit healing power or magic herbalism or something like that. It bothers me a lot that these people are in some way listed in my category, just because we're atheists. Sorry, I'm skeptic, I'm over here.
Yeah, I gave a talk at American Atheists in Austin where I said that skeptical groups aren't atheist enough to suit me quite often. And that's just a matter of personal opinion. You can have your group be a Bigfoot-only group, and that's your prerogative. But atheist groups aren't often skeptical enough to suit me, and that's a big frickin' deal because it's an embarrassment. We spend a lot of time congratulating ourselves for getting the correct answer to what I think is literally the easiest question, which is, do I have any good reason to think that there's a supernatural anything? And then we stop there. We congratulate ourselves on getting that right answer and kind of ignore the other areas where we might be kind of flawed in our thinking. I took a lot of heat for that, but I think that's kind of what we have to do.
That's outside the whole scientific issue with the genetic modifications and everything, but it's kind of right up the skeptical alley. Just a week ago, I had what turned into a somewhat heated discussion by email that I had to shut down with an atheist who seems to really be an atheist, but who believed, I work on Fort Hood, and who believed that Fort Hood was harboring a secret UN base from which I don't know, the UN and was going to come out and put people in camps or something. I never really did kind of grasp what he was talking about,
Let me see
but
if I understand this. A secret United Nations?
in the middle of Fort Hood.
How do you have how do you have nations united in secret?
Yeah, this went on. This conversation actually went on for about a week, mostly for my own entertainment, because I was bored, and then I finally just ended up had to shut it down when he got like too personal. But yeah, we have our shortages of skeptics among the atheists here and there in all sorts of fields.
There's a lot of confirmation bias that goes into it too. Beth talked briefly about this idea of mythicism and how when she first found out about it, it was really poor scholarship, and I mean, it's responsible for Zeitgeist, which I think is an absolute garbage film that has given a lot of people some really terrible foundations. But there's two different categories of mythicists. There are the conspiracy theorists, and I got an email from one of them today, who had bought into this idea that Christianity was an invention of the Pope and the Masons in the 4th century. How the hell do you get a Pope in the 4th century? I mean, it's like that level of dumb, but there's Richard Carrier's new book is out, which is on the historicity of Jesus, and it is a much more scholarly approach to the question, where he uses Bayesian analysis to determine that, yeah, probably Jesus didn't exist. But he's presenting it as a scholarly work to have other people look at it and say, is this a viable way of looking at history? But other people, you know, it's like, oh, all these other gods were just like Jesus. Well, no, not quite. There are some similarities, you know, blah, blah, blah. So we see a lot of this where once we've given up the idea that of a God, people are quick to glom onto anything that reinforces that. And that's exactly what we got out of, you know, some of us. So it'd be nicer if we did a little more work avoiding that too.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So this was already covered a little bit by the lady before me, but, well, before him, before me. I live in an area where the prevalence is a lot of young earth creationists, right? So I don't have a common ground to start with. Some of those respect my position. Some of those feel that they must proselytize or they're missing their job, right? And some of them are very well-meaning. But I feel the same questions over and over again over 15 years, 20 years. And I'm just wondering, do you feel that it's appropriate to keep challenging that? I mean, when they come to you, do you challenge back, or do you just try to divert and not have that conversation? Because we're not on enough common ground to actually ever meet in the near future.
Anybody that wants to have that conversation with me is going to get that conversation with me.
I kind of figured
Until
that.
they don't want it anymore.
I've been answering the same damn questions on the TV show for 9 years, and there's no way you can get me to stop. So, yeah.
What I like is
It's
when
entirely up to you. I mean, when you think you're done with it, you're done with it. Because you don't owe anybody an explanation for anything. You don't owe anybody a conversation. Nobody has to know what your justifications are. No. If you feel like you're being pushed into a conversation that you don't want to have anymore, don't have it.
This ain't church. The world's not on your shoulders. You don't have to save anybody. You don't have to save anything. You got one life, and that's the revelation that you received through now your non-belief. So what you do, you do. You do.
So I just try to be a good example, right? You just be the best person I can be and make sure that that's not tied to.
It helps the image overall, yeah.
Better than what some people are doing.
Hello. First, thank you all for coming to the conference. This is
That
my
hello
first-
was exactly like the one before.
Okay, thank you, I guess. I ended up talking to just people at work and generic people, people that aren't pastors and mostly lay Christians. For those people, assuming they don't really study their own Bible that much, they just get fed what the pastors and other people traveling tell them. therefore trying to quote scriptures they're usually very unfamiliar with. What kind of strategy do y'all use? Not necessarily in a long, 3-week-long discussion with this person, but generically, do y'all use moral arguments like slavery? Do you use, contrary scriptures?
Well, if you know the Bible better than them, you're already way up there. Because what's going to happen is you can quote a Bible verse to them, whether it's about slavery or women marrying their rapists or anything. You quote that to them, they're like, that's not in there. And then you can show them, pull it out on your phone, show them. They will go, they will study it, they will ask their pastor, you have planted a seed. It doesn't matter what verses you're using. As long as you've made them look at that Bible again, you are probably winning.
What about the ones that are hard faith? Like, I just have faith that God, whatever.
Well, you still don't know that you might not be planting a seed, is the only thing. Once they're backed into a corner and they're relying on just faith, you've won. You've really won. It may not look like you've won for a long time. They may not ever become an atheist. But you've backed them into a corner where they no longer feel that they have any evidence to use against you.
Yep.
So yeah, you've still done well.
And the one that I'd like to issue for the hard believer and for the novice, two things. When they say that the Bible is a moral guide, okay, show me something in the Bible that is moral and not also contradicted within the same Bible. And the second part of the challenge is when they're talking about it being the absolute truth, okay, fine. Show me something in there that you can actually show is true. And people don't understand that that's where the burden of proof belongs. It's not on me to prove that something is not true. It's, if you're going to declare something true, you have to have evidence to back it up. Because the way I define truth, and I probably have to explain this too, is that we don't just assume that something is truth because you say it's truth. It's truth when you can show that it is true. And that reality is not truth, but statements about reality can be.
Which forces them to go back to, I just have faith.
Exactly.
So, and really quickly, one of the most common emails that I get from people who are no longer believers, it's not because that I necessarily convinced them, but it's that
Here, take this one.
It's not necessarily that I convinced them, it's that they set out to prove me wrong. And that's one of the most powerful things. I mean, it's the reason we work with the Socratic method and asking questions so that people lead themselves to the conclusion. If they set out to prove me wrong and they fail, which is exactly how I got where I am, then they can get there too. On the issue of faith, keep an eye on my YouTube channel, because in October, that's like the second video I'm producing, which is all about faith and all about when they get to the point where they just say, well, you just have to have faith. Because that is the point to attack. Whatever they move to, that's the point of attack. And if they say you just have to have faith, or I just have faith, or whatever, is there anything that can't be justified by faith? Is there any position anybody could have that could not be justified by saying, well, I just have faith? I mean, once you start going down that road to show that faith is not a reliable path to truth, it's the excuse people give when they don't have a good reason. Then that puts, okay, now defend why do you have faith? And why, if you have faith in this, why don't you have faith in Islam? I mean, did you just kind of choose, or is this one you were born with? I mean, it really exposes the fact that people don't have good reasons, and that's why they say, oh, I have faith, because they're done with the good reason dialogue.
Okay, thank you all.
You can learn a good bit about the person if you'll ask this question as well. And I very seldom get this far into a conversation with anyone anymore. It's just not the way that I operate. I'm glad that there's other people out there that operate differently. On this side of the table, we were just saying, we're really glad y'all exist because y'all make this thing work. But I try to find out from them. If I'm forced to, I will ask, is faith works or a gift? The faith that you have, the fact that you're able to believe in God or in Jesus Christ, death, burial, and resurrection, is that works or is that a gift that you were given? Now, if they're going to follow modern Christian theology, then they should confess that it is a gift that they've received. Because if it's not a gift, then it's works. Now their salvation is something that they are earning, which is completely contrary to Christian theology. But if it's a gift, and they admit that it's a gift, then it's nothing that they've done. It's not a choice they've made. Now we're into predestination. God has given them the gift, and then I can ask, then why has your God not given me the gift?
Oh,
Now the
that's
subject's
awesome.
completely changed.
Yeah, it's like asking them not so much, why do you believe, which is interesting and important, but why do you think anybody else should believe? Because if it's a gift, as Jerry points out, and we haven't been given it, there's no point for them to address this. But if they can't come up with any things that they think should convince somebody else, then they're also dead in the water.
Again, thank you.
Thank you. This is my first time, I had said before, but I'm about to take advantage of this opportunity, if you will, all y'all gathered. So, my introduction to these types of questions about the deity and divinity and so forth is from my philosophy courses in college, and I was a philosophy and history major. But you know, I didn't get that jolt again until certain events happened, and the new atheist books that showed up from Sam Harrison on helped. And of course, some events that happened in recent years, particularly in the Black Church, with Bishop Eddie Long, you might know, that really got me outraged, and it got me into this. So I tell you this story so that it could help in answering this question. And so, to our former pastor, I want to ask, what is it about the relationship between congregations and people like Eddie Long that allows them to exploit people? I mean, and do they really mean it when they do those things, or are they just really evil people, exploiters? And I got further questions. And the other question I want to ask is about Islamophobia. I hear this word particularly being used. The conservatives don't use this. The Christian right doesn't use this. It seems to be the liberal folks that feel a bit of guilty about diversity and so forth that keep on using it in liberal publications. And I don't hear any word about Christianophobia or any other phobia that is that may be attributed to criticism of any other religion. So where did this word come from? And is there such a thing, actually legitimate Islamophobia? And what is that? And how is it different from what we do? If there's something legitimate as Islamophobia. And so third question I have is about...
Hang on.
Okay.
You can stay there,
Okay.
but let's get to those because it's a bunch.
Well, I think mine's the easiest one so far. I don't have an experience with pastors of that caliber, mega church pastors. My experience with pastors are local pastors, and I've never found an evil one. I have found greedy. I have found ambitious, confused, selfish, but not necessarily evil. So I try to give the local pastor the benefit of the doubt. I really do. I think many times they are truly good people with good intentions that are working within a very poor system. That's obviously not everybody, but that's just my experience. Someone from an outsider's point of view, I would think that pastors of the mega church level, that's something totally different. They have to be better businessmen than they are actually ministers to get to that level. And that's a total different game. Why do the people sit in the congregation and try to please men like that? It's because they want to be men like that. They see an image. There's something set before them that they're trying to emulate. And part of the methodology of getting to that position is pleasing the person that's in that position before you. You have to keep in mind that churches like that, especially whenever they proclaim the prosperity gospel, is almost like a form of network marketing, multi-level network marketing, where there's actually no soap. Right? There's no product. The whole thing's imagination. And so it's wrapped up in pleasing. It's wrapped up in emotions. So the people at the lower level, the newest people, they're trying to make their way up within that tribe. They're trying to get to that position. Most particularly when it comes to the prosperity gospel, which people like, Long preaches. But As far as the local people, the local pastors, I give them a lot of credit for more times than not being humanitarians.
As for the second question, since it was used against me today, from what I know of the term Islamophobia is that it's taken to be any kind of they often call it a racial slur, but it's any kind of a prejudicial bias of fear of whatever that actually is generalizing the entirety of it. When I testified at the Board of Education a week or so ago, there were a number of Christians up there that were following into that classification of Islamophobia. They're making broad blanket statements generalizing the entire religion. Now, I specified that there were people within this group that are standing up and saying, this does not represent us. For this, I'm accused of generalizing. But there were people at the state board or testifying before the state board that actually were making these huge blanket generalizations. And there was one man on the Board of Education who stood up to that and criticized it. And I can't remember his name. That's the one black member of the Board of Education. But I went up and shook his hand afterward. I said, I'm all for criticizing any group on specifics, but not broad blanket statements. And he said he was familiar with my work and shook my hand back. And it was a very good meeting.
So is there such a thing as Islamophobia?
Well, yes,
I mean, is that real?
Islamophobia, the way that I understand it, if I have to come up with a definition of it, the context that I've always sort of used, it is in reference to a prejudice against Islam. And whether it's the religion specifically or the culture, the certain cultures that surround it, it's just a generalization, a bigotry, a prejudice.
Yeah, it can be used as a code word. A lot of things that get called Islamophobia aren't, but there is also a lot of rhetoric. It's a very slippery thing to define. Even ex-Muslims I talk to don't necessarily have a very good working definition of it, but you can see it, especially like right-wingers. Like, there's a party in the UK that just has this horrible, violent, xenophobic, racist rhetoric against, they say against Islam, but if you really examine it, it's not about the teachings of Islam. It's about we hate the brown people. So there is real Islamophobia, but it's not generally what a lot of people in the atheist movement are doing. If they're criticizing specific things about Islam, it's when it gets wrapped up in that racialized rhetoric about foreigners and savages. And those things are sort of the hallmark of it. It is slippery to define, but I do think it does exist.
Yeah, I think it exists, but I'll just throw out a little example. I criticize tenets of Islam. I'm from American Atheists. That's what we do. We criticize tenets of Christianity. We criticize tenets of every religion. We tend to lean more towards Christianity because that's where the privilege is, and we're going after the privilege. But we do have our criticisms of other faiths. I don't think that makes any of us an Islamophobe. I'll give you an example of what I think does make somebody an Islamophobe here in Texas. I teach aerobics on the side. I'm trying not to be one of these military retirees that doubles in size every 2 years, because most of them
Thank you.
sometimes do. He's not a retiree though, he's good to go. But I teach aerobics on the side. On September 11th, my teaching day fell, and I play a lot of international music in my class. And I played a Bollywood Hindi song in my class. Some dude followed me out of the gym to my truck and said I was disrespectful to the people that died on September 11th by playing that raghead music in my gym class at the gym. And I had my weight bag in my hand, and I had my hands on a weight, and I thought about, here's a teachable moment. Maybe I can teach this guy the differences and explain why he's biased and whatever. And I looked at him, and he's like some roided out dude, twice my size. I said, you know what, hell with it. I dropped my bag, pulled out my weight. I said, if you take another step towards me, I'm going to introduce your nuts to your diaphragm. He apparently thought I meant it. It was a teachable moment, maybe not the one I could have had at the time, but then he left. That's an Islamophobe.
Yeah, and it's such a sad thing too, because we're talking about India, music from India. This is not necessarily, it's necessarily integrated with Islam. It could easily be Sikh, it could be Hindu, what have you.
Yeah.
And it's so broad. On the Halloween of 2001, my intent, I was a much thinner man at that point, My intent was to go out for Halloween as Rama. And then I realized, well, I live in Texas, and this was 1 month after the September 11th thing, and I realized all the idiots that live in this state would look at me dressed as Rama and think I was Muslim. Because who knows better in Texas, right? So obviously it didn't happen. Sad thing.
So there's that real thing about using, it's kind of like using Islam as a cover for a generalized bigotry, but it's become such a buzzword. And here's the example I'll talk about. I talk about Christianity a lot, not too favorably. And people will write in and say, well, that's not me, that's not my Christianity. And I'll say, then I clearly wasn't talking to you. But as long as you're going to use the same label and point to the same holy book and not call out the people who are using your religion in a way that disparages it, it's not so much that I'm painting with a broad brush, but if you're standing right frickin' next to him and get paint on you, that's not my problem. And I do the same thing with Islam. I don't paint all Muslims with the same brush. But if I'm addressing, problems in the Quran and problems with Sharia law and stuff, and there's other Muslims who would object to that, who get a little paint on them, change your damn label. Make it's not up to me to make a distinction between you and the other person who's also calling themselves the same thing. And I think that some people confuse that sort of not quite generalization with what Kathleen was talking about. So,
Last one. Want to ask you about the new atheist and interaction with you guys and what contact might be, and how they're viewed these days. I also read I just read The Nation yesterday or something. There was something about particularly feminist criticism of him and so forth, and I was just curious what you might have to say.
All right, it's been great. Love y'all.
is nobody?
Yeah, I don't understand.
After class.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We shouldn't have idols. The four horsemen are not idols. We don't have to agree with everything that, Dawkins, Harris, all them believe, or in the case of Hitchens, believed. I think there are some blind spots that some of these older white men have about women's experiences, feminism, and some people probably shouldn't tweet. And it is really hard to really have a discussion on that format anyway, on Twitter, in 140 characters. And a lot of generalizations are being made, a lot of issues are getting simplified, a lot of things are coming off of people's computers that, well, they probably mean them, but they might be educable, but everybody's doubling down after they're getting criticized and people are having, 140 words here and 140 words there. And these need to be longer, more substantive discussions.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much all I want to say about that.
Yeah, I want to say something too. I would think, based on what I've heard him say, that Hitchens was probably more on my side of the camp with regard to the feminism thing. He advocated, women having control of their own reproductive rights. That was a progressive thing. He also described how other prominent atheists or famous atheists had politics completely different from his own. And I'm okay with that, that there's, we're not going to agree on everything, just like religions don't agree on everything. I want to find the common goal, the common enemy, what can we work together on, and I'm not going to bother about too many other things as long as somebody else can provide an ally for the specific goal that I'm after. That's all I really care about. I don't expect everybody else to be as progressive in every other area or agree on everything that I do.
I will say, and if you object to this, I don't want to know you. There's not enough charitable listening taking place. There are people on both sides of issues where they're both wrong. The truth doesn't always lie right in the middle or on either side. There are people who are hyperbolic and reactionary, and some of them have pretty good reasons to be. But as somebody who's been in a position where I said something, and people who were internet friends of mine, who I actually agreed with, decided to not read it particularly charitably and wanted to write me off. And if this is what we're doing to the people who we generally agree with and who are on our side, how charitably are we listening to the people who we definitely don't agree with? And this isn't about giving everybody every opportunity and just letting them walk all over you. It's about if you actually care about changing minds, if you actually care about moving the dialogue towards something that's productive, throwing a fit and writing somebody off at the first sign of disagreement is probably not the way to do it. It's well within your rights, and if that's what you need to do to keep yourself from getting into what you think are pointless arguments, that's fine. But if we're not going to listen charitably, at least to the people that are part of our community, and then have the discussion, I think we're stuck. And I'll take back what I said. You could disagree with me.
Hi, I'm Matt.
You're Matt.
I'm also Matt. Oh no, we could be friends, but I'll stay here. I had a question when I got in line, but then I got a different question, more appealing to myself, and it's just out of curiosity. Mr. Dillahunty said he didn't like the Zeitgeist movie. I'm just curious as to why, because the whole trilogy really changed me as a person, and it started my deconversion. And I'm just curious as to why.
Well, you're not going to like this answer. Zeitgeist is a film put together in 3 parts, and the first part uses some astrotheological mythicism to make the argument that Jesus didn't actually exist. Unfortunately, and I'd recommend Carrier's book and some others, a lot of it was based on some rather unscholarly work, and originally it was worse. When they started getting, there's actually a website called Debunking Zeitgeist. When they started getting criticism, they went back and edited it because they had some stuff that only worked in English, and we're trying, like the Son of God and S-U-N and S-O-N. That only works in English, and there was no English. So, I mean, that's the level of arguments. The second half is the 9/11 conspiracy stuff, or second third, and the third is about banking and... So there's also a Debunking 9/11 website. Here's the thing. Here's what conspiracy theorists do. Because Zeitgeist is conspiracy theory thinking. Conspiracy theories take disparate facts and weave together a compelling narrative that seems reasonable as long as you don't investigate any further. And my concern is that, and I'm only going to focus on the first part, the part about Christianity for now, is that if there are people out there who weren't atheists and who became atheists because of Zeitgeist, now they essentially have an unscholarly, flimsy foundation. And if they go out and they talk to people who actually know, and they talk to people, historians, about how this stuff progressed, if they talk to Bible scholars, if they talk to Christians who know, and the information's all out there about debunking that whole first part, are they going to remain, atheists? Are they going to say, oh my gosh, I've been lied to yet again? I want people to have good reasons for whatever they believe, and I don't find Zeitgeist to be a good reason, but it's too lengthy to get into here. But if you email me, I can get you a website that goes through every single flaw in the thing.
Yeah, and likewise with other sources like Kersey Graves, 16 Crucified Saviors.
Yeah.
I went through that book, and while there are some similarities to some pre-Christian Christ-like figures, several of the ones that are cited in that book aren't correct. And if the information isn't correct, then it should be thrown out.
And it was that way in The God Who Wasn't There either, Brian Fleming's movie. There was a little bit of that in there. Here's the thing. Doesn't mean they're wrong. I disagree with them on their conclusion. But showing that somebody's got bad reasons to reach their conclusion doesn't mean the conclusion's wrong. It just means that they haven't proved that it's true. And so the conclusions of each of those could ultimately be right. I mean, but they haven't made the case, and they've tried to make a case on flimsy footing. And here's my real kind of this isn't a secret to anybody who knows me. I freaking hate bad arguments, but I hate them even more when they're for positions that I have. And so I'm a little harder on some of my atheist friends and colleagues if they make a bad argument, partly because I want them to be harder on me if I do the same thing as well. Because if we're going to change the world, we cannot have like Christians sitting back going, oh God, look at those dumbass atheists. They don't, in Christianity invented in the 4th century, by the Pope. I mean, are they not even thinking? In the debate that I did with Cy, there's one thing, might be the only thing that he got right, but there's one thing he definitely got right, and that was this argument when somebody asked him how he deals with Muslims. And he says, I asked them if they believe the Quran, and if they believe that the Quran says that the Bible is a previous revelation of Allah. Because if the Quran says the Bible is true, and what the Bible says means the Quran is false, then Islam is false. And so he phrased it as, if you believe the Quran, you have to believe the Bible, and if you believe the Bible, you can't believe the Quran. And people laughed at him and mocked him, and they made an internet meme. This is a valid reductio ad absurdum argument that demonstrates a contradiction. It's one of the most potent tools in the arsenal. It's the one thing that Cy got right, and yet he got mocked for it. And part of that goes back to charitable listening and the idea that people in debate conversations get to the point where I know he's wrong, even if I don't necessarily know why, and so I'm just going to, you're wrong. And so we do that a lot. And people have done it with Zeitgeist and criticized things that were actually correct in Zeitgeist, but there is a website that kind of goes through and shows where they got it wrong.
Thank you.
I just have a just real quick, easy question. You guys may have not heard this question before. Where do atheists derive morality from? Totally kidding.
Does anybody have an answer to this question?
No, I actually have a softball question for everybody.
Stop you right there.
Got an easy one for you, actually. I see a lot of diversity in the, I guess I don't know what I'd say, the specialties of everybody here. Philosophy, feminism, science, activism, humanism, all the different things. What would you say is your biggest atheist influence or even favorite YouTube blogger, philosopher, scientist, etc.? Just for each one of you.
My favorite YouTube philosopher is Phil Helines.
On YouTube?
Well, not necessarily just on YouTube. I'm saying
Well, Everett's Hume.
of anything, yeah, philosophers, whatever, maybe.
David Hume is the only person anybody ever needs to read or pay any attention to in philosophy, but if you're going to go to YouTube, Ozymandias Ramses II is probably up there, because he's probably the one that's helped me the most.
I actually don't get to spend much time on YouTube because I live so far out in rural Texas that I have to make do with satellite internet, which is data capped and very expensive if you go over your cap, so we don't have the video. But for like influences, that kind of started me thinking skeptically, Carl Sagan in the original Cosmos.
Very early on, Carl Sagan, Demon Haunted World. It's very, very good. But probably the greatest influence that caused me to be where I'm at today is actually due to Stella Williamson, my grandmother, who taught me to love God with all my heart and to love people with all my heart. And in trying to do so, that's what brought me to where I'm at today. Then the first real internet exposure that I had that started really waking my mind up in a way that it had not been awakened previously was TED Talks. The TED Talks were very, very important. Now it's SciShow and Crash Course.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi again. Before I ask my question, I would just like to say something. It'll be okay if I just kind of say this is a room full of atheists. Is that okay? Or for a lot of it?
Full.
A room. There's just about everyone in this room in the middle of East Texas, in the middle of the Bible Belt. There's a whole bunch of us, and there's a whole lot more earlier that all have a lot of the same ideologies and opinions and everything like that. I just think that is so cool. 'Cause this is my first thing ever. Like, this is the most I've ever seen. I could probably count up every YouTube video I've watched. My question is, besides Christianity, Judaism, Islam, are there any off-kilter religions? I guess I would call them tribal religions that y'all have people that y'all have conversed with or debated, and just I guess how did that go? I can't think of a better way to say it.
I had a real interesting conversation with a guy who thought the Force from Star Wars was real.
You
And
can't prove it's not.
we know the fun sci-fi groups that pretend it's real and have a real good time with it, but this guy thought he was a Jedi and he thought it was real. That was a good time.
Kathleen is not aware that I was a Jedi sincerely for about 15 years.
Seriously?
Serious.
Maybe he was the one I was corresponding with.
The only religious argument I ever heard that made sense is what Obi-Wan Kenobi said when he described the Star Wars, when he described the Force. I'm like, yeah. I was a teenager.
Yeah, outside of the mainline religions, I think the weirdest one for me, I went on the TV show and stupidly said, nobody believes in the Greek gods anymore. And then I got email from people, not person, people, who did.
And there's still a Satru out there too.
And that's when that was yet another example where I've started to parse my words and I say, mostly nobody believes, or almost nobody believes.
And here in Texas, I actually have a friend who's, I can't pronounce the word you said, but Norse religions.
Yeah, yeah. And going back to what you said, what you said at the beginning about it being interesting that, we've got a plurality of opinions here and people disagree. I said in my talk that it's more important how you disagree. There's lots of things that Aron and I have disagreed on. And one of the things, one of the first ramen podcasts, we talked about, we had a disagreement about whether or not Ray Comfort is sincere.
Yeah.
We're going to do another one about whether or not Jesus claimed to be God.
Yeah.
And, but I'd rather disagree with Aron, have an argument, and still disagree with him than half the people I have disagreements with anyway, because we're going to be friends till we die. So.
Again, thank y'all for coming.
Thank you.
This is something I sort of talked a little bit about with Jerry earlier, but I wanted to get as much input as I possibly could. This is also my first convention, and I think it's really cool that, above all that it's here in my hometown. I was born here, I was raised here, I went to school here, I still live here, so the fact that this is happening in my own backyard is the coolest thing ever to me. I feel really inspired by this convention. I want to go out and do something, do more, but I don't know exactly what it is that I should do. My question is, what sort of things can I do or should I do to figure out exactly where my niche is within the movement so I can make the difference that I want to make?
Well, first, talk to the director of this event and the people that hover about him, and they'll get you in touch with all of the local meetup groups. And through the various meetups, you'll establish relationships there about what you'll find where the weaknesses are, where your strengths are. I refer people a lot in my area, in Dallas. We have the Dallas-Fort Worth Coalition of Reason, which is comprised of 24 different affiliated atheist, freethinker, skeptic groups. And they do all kinds of stuff. They do humanitarian aid, they do roadside cleanup, they do arts and crafts projects, they do Camp Quest, they do all kinds of charitable stuff. They do a lot of blogging, they do a lot of activism, they do the Gay Pride Parade. They're involved in everything. And when you get with these meetup groups and find out what they're all involved in and get networked with them, you'll have plenty to do.
Yeah, it's usually, I've never met a group that didn't have a list of things they'd like to do but didn't because they didn't have the right people or enough people. And so talk to them about what it is that they're looking to do and see if you can find the thing that strikes you the most. The other thing is you've got to ask yourself, what do I want to do? And if you don't know yet, that's completely fine. But if there's something that you feel strongly about or some special skill you have, take that to the group and make proposals. Because when I ran the ACA, my thing was this group needs to be whatever the members need it to be. And so if you have an idea, my answer is going to be yes, absolutely, we'll do that, provided you steer the committee, so that we're not putting everything back on one person's shoulders.
Now, one of the best parts about living in the time we live in now is even in the small towns in Texas like Nacogdoches, some of those stepping stones, some of that groundwork is already being laid. So all you got to do is just see what's there, step on, and get involved, and it'll become readily apparent where you can help. But you don't have to start from scratch. Because even here, some decent groundwork has already been laid.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. First, a quick shout out to my lovely wife who got my ticket and suggested this event, and I'm very grateful for that and for everything else.
Thank you guys for standing in line for these questions.
I think it is a very good strategy. So my actual question is really just kind of an elaboration on, I got in line because somebody was asking a question about pertaining to referencing a pastor named Eddie Long. I hadn't heard of him, and so if you could just give a brief description of the context of what that was about, that would help me to understand what your answer was about
The
that.
answer falls to Jerry.
Well, there was, I'm not going to go into all the details. You can Google it, you know more than I could tell you in 15 seconds. But there was a sexual scandal. What makes it even more scandalous is the pretense that these mega church and their mega church leaders carry of perfection, and that it is this perfection that God is rewarding, and rewarding them with all of these worldly possessions. They fly in a jet, and you can fly in a jet too if you'll just live a life as good as they live. They wear, $1,200 suits, and you can too if you just continue to come to service, pay your tithes, be obedient, and be as good as they are. And so he was caught, not surprisingly, in a sexual scandal, and that pulled the lid off and troubled some people, but doesn't trouble everybody, and he still just keeps rocking right along.
Well, one of the things is that he was militantly anti-gay, and the sex scandal was with guys.
So have you noticed a pattern when they're militantly anti-gay, and then they're caught in a hotel with somebody from rentaboy.com?
Ted Haggard is
Since I
completely
brought the
innocent.
question, do you mind if I chime in,
Yes,
clarify?
go ahead, please.
The reason why that he was significant was he's huge in the black community. When Martin Luther King's wife died, Miss Loretta Scott King, Presidents Bush, Clinton, and Carter, all of America's dignitaries went to his church for her funeral. And then this guy, he's a big honcho is what I wanted to say by bringing up these people. And very respected. Tavis Smiley holds his annual State of Black America thing there. So in the larger black community, he's a big guy. What he was accused of was abusing boys while he was railing against homosexuality this entire time. And he built his body and posts all kinds of pictures on social media about his muscles and his this and that. But what really made it even worse after he was accused was he denied it, yet he paid a settlement, millions of dollars. And at the same time, he goes back to his congregation and he acts like he was a victim in this scenario. And he brings about I forget what exactly they call him, but a Jewish Messianic Jew, I think, a Messianic Jew rabbi. He gets about 3-4 black guys to lift him up from a chair, and they take him around his mega church, and he's wrapped around with Jewish scrolls, and he's anointed king. It was such an outrageous situation where even pastors in the Christian church, would have preached like, "Hey, I have sinned, forgive me," or something. There was none of this stuff. It was just such an extremely arrogant act, and that's what railed me up. And a lot of people may not have noticed, but it was all over the news.
Yeah, there's a lot of weirdness like that in churches where they've departed from orthodoxy and focused more on their culture and kind of like a cult of personality. where, you know, the one individual takes over and is infallible. There's a guy in Florida who swears he's the second coming of Jesus, or maybe the third coming of Jesus, I don't know. That guy comes more than anybody.
Well, it's
I've
one of
always had
the,
that.
being able
Sorry.
to do that is one of the signature benefits of the charismatic movement, is that you can really just make the rules up as you go. You have departed from mainstream Christianity. Well, it's more mainstream now than a lot of other forms, but the orthodoxy is no longer an issue that you have to deal with. You can just, if you put on a good enough show, and you make it enjoyable enough, and you give people the impression that they too can get to where you're at, then you can really get away with almost anything.
Did you guys see that Preachers of LA series or whatever? So these guys are filthy rich. They're just taking in money left and right. I can't call them frauds without getting sued, but I have suspicions. And they're all poor compared to Joel Osteen and his smiley, happy prosperity gospel out of Houston. So.
Well, hello guys. My name is Brian. I live in Houston, Texas, but this is my hometown. I grew up here, so it's really, really fantastic to see this kind of thing going on. You know, all of my Christian roots were right here and taken away here. But anyway, my question is, I don't know if y'all are aware, or maybe if y'all have heard through the grapevine, or you know, in science articles and stuff like that, where there's been some new neurocognitive studies on the human brain and how we're all hardwired differently, basically. And there might be some strong evidence where some people are more inclined to believe, or they're hardwired more to believe, and say, you know, a skeptic will, where their emotional satisfaction is a little higher than what their intellectual satisfaction would be, whereas skeptics would be on the opposite side of the spectrum. So in saying that, people generally get a healthy benefit from believing in something higher than themselves, is basically what the argument is. And reason why we have religions and that kind of thing to begin with, you know, beliefs in gods and that sort of thing. And we all know that there are some benign religions out there that really don't do any harm to anybody.
No, I don't.
And
Yeah, I'm an anti-theist, I don't believe that either.
okay. So I guess in short term, or maybe in the long term goal, is it more reasonable to go after and, you know, try to point out where all the religions are false, which, you know, we all know they are. The premises are completely, you know, made up. Instead, going after the toxic elements involved with them and trying to eradicate those first might make it bigger dent.
Well, I don't know about what to attack first. My big issue, the reason I say that I'm an anti-theist, is the problem is I'm also an epistemist, which most people won't be familiar with this word. It's a new word. It describes somebody who rejects all beliefs that are based on faith or that depend on faith. Because I think that the reason that religion is a problem is because it relies on faith. As I say all the time, it is dishonest to assert as fact that which is not evidently true, and that's what all religions do. And so if that would be universally dishonest in every other application than religion, it should be considered dishonest within religion too. And that's why I attack that. Now, there are certain ones that make themselves out to be much greater targets than others. And of course, I'll visit them as need be. But in general, the aspect of faith is the real problem that I see underlying all of them, without any other, you know, newsworthy atrocities going on.
Okay. I don't want to be the only one who talks, but I have something to say about everything.
That's why I gave you the mic that always works.
These guys aren't shocked. I'm fine with triaging, like for greatest harm type thing. The reason I said I disagreed about benign religions, it's because beliefs don't live in a vacuum, and I'm convinced that every false belief you have and the foundations for why you believe that false belief affect other things. That doesn't mean they're all equally bad. There are certainly some that are closer to benign, you know. But I mean, looking at the Jains, I mean, but I think that that's actually that their religion is doing harm to them. Maybe they're not necessarily doing so much harm to others, but if you've got this thing where you're wearing a mask so that you don't, you know, accidentally inhale and kill a fly, it tells you something about your value and how you value humans. And Jains are not humanists. The Jain view is more along the lines that you might even consider us a plague on the planet, that we are as much of harm as anything else. Which isn't to say that they're wrong, but I don't find that particularly healthy. On the neuroscience thing, I love it. And I think, I've said for a while now that I think the idea of a soul is the most dead of all dead ideas that has ever come out of religion because of what we know about the brain now.